The following presentation is part of the Technology and the Corporation Conference Series, sponsored by MIT's Industrial Liaison Program.
I want to shift the conversation today a little bit from the here and now of newly available, amazing commercial technologies to what lies ahead, especially in the next 5 or so years in the area of digital, sort of personal digital technologies. So this major event happened in the last 20 years, but it's happened so sort of smoothly and gradually that we haven't really sort of stepped back and looked from a distance at this sort of major milestone in the history of humanity and given it a name. Basically, we have become cyborgs. People have become cyborgs. We all get a cell phone, at least in the US, but increasingly elsewhere as well, when we're like 13, 14 or so, and especially the younger generations will never be without that technology until they die. They have it with them day and night. Of course, it hasn't been entirely a positive development. Most of the teenagers we see around, walking around like this, they basically don't pay attention so much anymore to the people around them, the environment around them. The interaction itself with the devices leaves a lot to wish for as well. Basically, you use your 2 thumbs and you look at this tiny little screen. We're not really taking advantage of sort of all of our senses when we interact with this technology, which we increasingly sort of spend our time doing. Now, there's been many voices sort of out there that say that we should try to sort of resist or maybe even reject this whole phenomenon. People arguing for technology-free Saturdays and conversations where we talk face-to-face without a phone in the room, etc. But other people, other philosophers, for example, Andy Clark, have argued that this is actually a natural progression sort of how people have always designed new tools to augment themselves. What makes people unique is actually the fact that we invent tools that make us smarter than we naturally are. So personally, I also believe that we will never go back, basically. We will not sort of go back to being non-cyborgs again. And so we might as well embrace our cyborg future and think about how we should redesign and re-engineer personal technologies so that they really help us with the personal goals and the self-actualization, etc., that we ultimately all sort of strive for. So I believe that in the next 5 or 10 years, people will start resisting the ways in which we use personal technologies like cell phones and all the apps and services today. And I think people will demand personal digital technologies that augment them and are very intimate and know them intimately, but that actually help them and help them with their goals and with sort of the dreams that they have. So while today's technologies distract, we basically have this attention economy where all these different apps and companies are all trying to grab our attention and keep our attention for as long as possible and hopefully make money along the way. I think that we will shift towards sort of technologies, personal technologies, the future generation of the cell phone, basically, that is more supporting a person with their individual goals and helping them sort of make decisions that are ultimately more in their interest rather than that of the companies. So as Tony mentioned, I run a research group here at the Media Lab, just one floor down. And what we try to do in that group is sort of design that future where I think we are going. We try to redesign personal technologies and the whole sort of human-machine relationship. And we try to basically come up with a model that is much less disruptive, where the devices and really the services that they offer are much more of an extension, a natural extension of an individual, and help that individual, sort of assisting that individual with their goals. I'll give you a lot of examples in a minute. Now, there's definitely a lot of changes ahead in terms of the capabilities of these personal technologies. For one, increasingly, all the technologies that we surround ourselves with are sort of always on, glanceable, always interfacing with us, and very aware of our context and increasingly aware of our bodies and minds as well. So you see, of course, smartwatches, and increasingly there's things like the Hololens and other augmented reality devices that can always sort of give you information wherever you are. You no longer have to take your phone out of your pocket and start something, but the system is always on, is always able to give you just-in-time messages. Some other developments that are happening are that devices are increasingly aware of the context as well as the person themselves. Increasingly, we wear things like the Empatica bracelet here that can read heart rate and galvanic skin response, and a range of other sort of data, physiological data. So increasingly, our devices actually have more access to our emotional state. We will also increasingly have EEG, I believe, as one of the technologies for these devices to be more aware of our internal state. The devices are also becoming more aware of the context, having cameras like the narrative clip, or constantly listening to our conversations, and so on. And last but not least, of course, all these devices are becoming smarter with sort of all the progress that has been made in AI. So I believe that the personal technologies of the next 5 to 10 years will basically use all of these capabilities to act as our personal coach, our personal coaches helping us with our personal goals. A while ago, we illustrated what this means in a system that basically sort of constantly gives you just-in-time messages and information that is useful to whatever you are currently doing. So that, for example, when you pick up a product, it can give you the rating that people have given to that product, or maybe it can give you a review of that product, or speak the review in your ear, or tell you that a friend liked it, etc. So increasingly, our whole experience will be augmented like this with proactive information that is provided to us, rather than us having to sort of reach into our pocket, get out a device to find out whether a particular book or whatever that we're considering buying is worth reading or not. Now, these personal coaches will basically, in some cases, be AI systems. But in other cases, they can actually be another human. Increasingly, it will be possible for one person to be virtually present with another person. And let me give you an example of a system that we built that illustrates this. This gentleman here wants to learn English, was a summer intern, Spanish-speaking summer intern in our group. We gave him a Google Glass interface, and he can just go about his day, go to the supermarket, etc., and he streams the images of what he's looking at someone else who could well be in China or Japan, who constantly labels all the the things that he's looking at in English, so that he can actually, the user here can learn a second language just going about their regular day with a remote expert basically telling him what everything is called, so he can hear what things are called: apple, pear, lemon, etc. He can ask for some suggestions in real time, like how do I speak to the clerk, how do I ask how much do I owe, etc. So this other person is virtually present, but this could just be for this particular interaction, say a 5-minute interaction in a supermarket, and the two may not know each other. There may be a marketplace like Amazon Mechanical Turk that just matches people up with other people who can help them with a particular task, either a decision-making task or a learning task in the moment. So this vision that we are trying to put forward of sort of human-machine symbiosis will really change everything, I think, or how people lead their lives. It will change how they make decisions and also purchasing decisions, how people learn, how we remember, how we communicate, how we collaborate, and more. I want to give you some other examples from our work at the lab. Take supporting decision-making. Right now, I mean, lots of us, of course, shop online, but when you're in the supermarket, it's still a little bit cumbersome to get out your phone and look up some product and so on. So we basically don't really do it, unless it's maybe a very expensive item that we're purchasing and we really want to invest a little bit more time in the decision. But increasingly, you will have these interfaces that know that you are reaching for a bottle of Coca-Cola, that know that you have said that you want to reduce your sugar intake. And increasingly, these devices will proactively, in that moment, give you messages to try to discourage you, in this case, from buying Coca-Cola. So it may give you maybe a little unhappy face, or it may give you some factual information. And what is really interesting is that these devices can learn what works for you. So maybe for one person, seeing little unhappy smiley faces is the way to discourage them from buying some product. Maybe for other people, it's a very different type of message, maybe something very factual, like how many grams of sugar are in that Coca-Cola bottle. Maybe for someone else, it's a social type of message. For example, in my case, maybe the system would tell me that my sisters who are in great shape would never drink a bottle of Coke or something. And so, but the point is that because the devices are personal, they can actually learn about the user. Your system will start basically experimenting on you, even though that sounds bad, but will learn. You will sort of run a service or an app that is in charge of trying to make you consume less sugar, and that app can actually learn over time what types of messages will work for you versus for someone else. So I believe that these coaches will not just give you conscious, symbolic types of messages, but that increasingly we will be using sort of subconscious types of messages as well. And of course, advertisers, marketers, psychologists have learned a lot about how smells and music and things of that sort really help or persuade people to make certain decisions. What if every time that I look at a Coca-Cola bottle, sort of some scent is created that is really awful? I start associating the Coca-Cola bottle with that particular bad smell, discouraging me from consuming that product in the future. This is actually one of the systems that we have built at the lab. My student Judith Amores built a system that can basically release certain smells as controlled by your cell phone based on whatever your context is, as well as what some of your physiological data are. So she uses it to influence mood as well as other issues. You may have heard of some other interesting startups, such as Brain.fm and the Sync project, who look at the effect of music on people's decision-making, on people's behavior, etc. We haven't really made use of that in our digital technologies, but increasingly, I think we will start interfacing with people via these personal technologies in more subconscious types of ways. Of course, the device is always with you. Your phone or the software and the data that is being collected by your phone can know you better than your mother, father, best friend, or spouse. Nobody else is with you as much as the time as, or nothing else is with you as much of the time as another person. Or as your cell phone. So I think that our devices will actually know us incredibly well and will actually start being able to predict when we may break down to go smoke a cigarette, for example, because they will have access to, again, our physiological data. They will know our past behavior and so on, and can predict based on that what the likely future actions and behaviors will be, and then again can try to intervene in the moment if maybe you want to sort of get rid of a bad habit such as smoking. So while today this whole self-help industry is $7 billion per year or more, books that teach you how to be thin and how to win over friends and how to rescue relationships and all of that, I think increasingly all of this will be software, basically, services that you subscribe to that basically in the moment help you with changing your behavior. And I believe that they will be a lot more effective than today's books, videos, and human coaches that we see for these problems. Learning will be affected as well. This is another system that we are working on in the lab right now, where we use the Hololens augmented reality system to allow a person to just learn about the world around them and find out what things are called in a particular language. So again, this is like the tag-along system that I showed before, except that in this case, it's an artificial intelligence system rather than another human who is labeling everything around you in not quite real time, but we will get there. Increasingly, you will learn about physics and things like that, not by going into a classroom, but by just having a system that knows about physics, that can predict the consequences of pushing a particular block in a particular structure, etc. And while this is a toy example, really, where the system, as you will see, can show what will happen when you push a particular block, it anticipates the future a little bit. I think that in the cases of, for example, cars, these types of systems will be incredibly useful. Your car will start predicting, maybe based on the data from many other drivers, that if you keep going 60 miles an hour with the rain that we currently have, that you may actually not make this particular turn because 20% of the other cars that did this in that same turn actually slipped and veered off the road. So the impact on learning, surprisingly, schools have only existed for a little bit more than 100 years. And before that, we learned in the real world from masters in a master-apprentice relationship, etc. I think that increasingly both learning by children as well as learning in the job will happen while you are sort of in the physical world, interacting with the things around you. So the moment when you have to diagnose and repair your computer is when you need some just-in-time information about what, how to diagnose, or what the different steps are to diagnose the problem. We also work on things like supporting memory. We've already 20 years ago, we had some of the first wearable computers in the lab, and my student basically recorded every conversation that he had with me, making it, and then the system helped him by sort of reminding him of relevant previous conversations about the current topic. It completely changes the conversations between people when one of the people has a perfect memory, external memory in this case, and can remind the other person of how they're contradicting themselves, for example. We've done systems like this one, again, using augmented reality, where you constantly record everything that is happening, for example, in the case of a lecture, and you can just rewind a little bit if you missed something and replay privately some of your real experience. For example, you shake someone's hand, and in fact, the system has a sensor around the arm so that it can recognize the handshake and then always memorizes that little bit of video and audio before and after, so that you will never sort of not remember the names of people you meet. Another system that uses or helps you remember things by using augmented reality and the concept of the memory palace, which some of you may know about. We trained people to study or to learn the set of Super Bowl winners of the last 30 years. And the way we did that is by having them go from home to work, and we show them in sequence, whenever they're in a particular landmark position, what the team is, the next team that won one of the Super Bowls, so the Cowboys and the Dolphins and the Packers, etc. And because we present that information as you are going from home to work, you can actually easily replay and figure out or remember and recall who the winners are of the Super Bowl, even though it's a very random set of information, because you can remember your path from home to work, and you remember where you saw the Dolphins, where you saw the Packers, where you saw the Jets, etc. Communication will be augmented as well. We've built several augmented reality systems with handheld systems, as well as with sort of the new augmented reality headsets that make it possible for people to annotate the real world. So you can see here how one person is drawing flowers, placing them in 3D, and then another person can just see what that first person left in that particular position. We have a version of that with done with Microsoft HoloArt version, where you just use your finger to annotate the physical world with messages that other people can then see in that world. Lastly, supporting collaboration. I already showed the system earlier that enables one person to be virtually present with another person. We've gone a little bit further than that and make it possible for the remote person to make their hands show up in real time in the world, the visual field of the person who needs help. So here we have someone who needs help with the use of a laser cutter, and the remote person can actually make her hands in real time show up in the visual field of the person who needs help, saying this is the button that you should push and the slider should be about this far, etc. Even going beyond that, in a next system that we built, the remote user can actually control IoT objects, smart objects, just by using the same gestures that you would use if you actually, say, turned the knob of a radio when you were physically present. So increasingly, these distances will be non-existent, and people will be able to advise others wherever they are, but even act in the remote world through some of these new technologies that are being built. Maybe I should just show a last example. While today's in well-being, while today's technologies, wearable technologies for well-being, are primarily focused on collecting data, the quantified self type of style of applications, increasingly sort of these systems that we will have with us all the time will intervene and will actually change some of our data. So this is a system built here by my colleague Rosalind Picard and her student Asma, which it's a little bit hard to see, but if you look at the screen, it slowly sort of gets darker and brighter. The system is actually keeping track of her heart rate, and when her heart rate goes above a particular target sort of threshold, the screen or the audio will actually encourage her to basically slow down and calm down. And Asma in her work showed that this intervention technology can really affect and change people's heart rate. So the system isn't just collecting information, it's actually changing her physiological data, in this case with the screen as well as with music. So I think I'll end there, so we have a couple of minutes for questions. So I believe that in the future, and I don't think this is a very distant future, that our personal technologies will become less disruptive and will become more of a natural extension of the user that augments the user, that assists the user and empowers the user and is extremely personalized and intimate with the user, knowing the user, modeling the user, and helping the user with the goals that they have set for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have a few questions, and
I can imagine.
I like the first one, and I'm going to personalize it a little bit by asking you, who have been at the forefront for many years, we don't have to say how many, because I'm there, how easy, how adoptable, how, I know my 22-year-old kid has absolutely no problem with this, but how easy is it for these things to be adopted by us all?
Yeah, and I can see that the question is also specifically about speech, I guess. And I don't think, while speech is, of course, very useful for interacting with a machine, I don't think that speech will be necessarily the dominant interaction medium for us to talk to these machines and these personal technologies. Speech is slow. Speech is not private. Speech can be ambiguous, etc. So there's many disadvantages to speech. So while in some situations, when you're cooking, when you're driving, etc., being able to talk to an intelligent device is useful, I think that these personal devices of the future will actually use different modalities to interact with us, the visual one with augmented reality, but also some of these subconscious types of modalities that we have not really exploited in the design of personal technologies, such as, again, smell, sound, music, and more. Yeah.
The second
Yep.
two votes, companies like Coca-Cola approving this technology. I mean, a lot of what you talk about is the power that we, the consumer, are getting. How does the company feel? And we've had speakers talk about the company needs to let go, but how much gets let go?
Yeah, I think we've already seen a trend of consumers basically being empowered more by all this information technology. And basically, this is a continuation of this trend. I think until now, sort of companies were at a disadvantage because they had a lot of research showing what kinds of messages are effective, etc. But now people can actually start using some of these technologies on themselves, basically. Some of what we do is actually, it's almost like a type of persuasion of yourself. So the external device that is always with you is trying to help you and persuade you to act in a particular way. And hopefully it is the person who ultimately determines what those goals are that they want to accomplish and that the system tries to maximize. But yeah, I think that this relationship of this power relationship will shift even more in the direction of consumers being able to fend off some of the persuasion that is coming at them from the companies and being able to use some of that same technology on themselves. Sorry?
The first question was topic.
Yeah. Can everybody read it? What might the required checks and balances be to prevent Skynet from going live? Though it will be nice to have Arnold walk our streets or hell. So I think there's a lot of talk right now in the media about artificial intelligence and how these devices will take away 50% of our jobs, and maybe even eventually how these systems will get rid of us. And personally, I don't call my work artificial intelligence. I call it intelligence augmentation. I'm interested in how people can basically make themselves super intelligent rather than sort of having these independent intelligent machines that then sort of we have to start negotiating with or collaborating with. So I think it makes more sense to think about what some people have termed extended intelligence, or how we can really complement the intelligence of one person, but also of groups of people with sort of artificial intelligence technologies rather than building a copy of humans.
You talked a bit about in the next 5, 10 years, you see X, Y, and Z happening. To the first question there, what areas can be improved the most to make this happen sooner? Or where do you want the next breakthrough? Or what do you want your next student to make for us?
Yeah, so I think it's incredibly exciting that there's a lot of innovation in some of these new headsets, the AR and VR headsets. They're still heavy. They're not the kind of thing you would wear all day long. And then there's also social acceptance problems, as we saw with Google Glass. But I think that advantages in that area, and we will get there, we will, in the not too distant future, have glasses that look more like the eyeglasses that some of you are wearing, but that can give us all of these types of services that I talked about. So I think that's an important one to make progress, to make this ultimately acceptable. But a lot of the technologies that I talked about today, though, can also, or a lot of these services, can also be provided on smartwatches or headphones that whisper in your ear, and so on. So it doesn't necessarily require visual augmented reality headsets. Should I? Yes. Yeah. So for companies interested in piloting, I guess you can read it, it's big enough. I think indeed that it's very interesting to start piloting sort of different services with augmented reality. These devices are increasingly more available and cheaper. And again, I think you can start piloting things that are offered in other form factors as well, like on smartwatches or just audio-based versions of augmented reality rather than these headsets. And I think it's really important for companies to start experimenting both with how this will affect consumers as well as how this will change people, how you do your work basically, and people within the companies and how they collaborate and so on. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, let's take the one with the 2 votes. Yeah, so I think that we've sort of gone in an unfortunate direction a little bit with sort of the internet, because everything has to be free, and as a result, everything has to be paid for by advertising. And as a result, we have this whole attention economy where all of you are competing to sort of get as much attention or time from the consumer as possible. I do think that we need new business models actually for how some of these new types of services will be introduced, new business models where the consumer pays basically, and so the consumer's interests are aligned with those of the service provider. And I think we will see increasing interest from consumers in that, because all of us are going a little bit crazy, being sort of pulled in all these different directions by all these different companies trying to get our attention.
Which takes us to the next question. The human brain is not designed for effective multitasking.
Yep. Yeah, so right now, these devices that we use are not very smart, and even though they know where you are and your software basically knows that you're in a meeting or giving a talk right now, etc., the services that we use aren't really making use of this information to basically be less disruptive. I think we will see increasingly services that are more context aware, where a system gives just-in-time information about whatever the person is doing, relevant information, as opposed to constantly sort of pulling a person away from the here and now and the problem that they're trying to solve towards something that is totally unrelated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Much appreciated.